Right, comrades. Well, this coming week is going to be a crucial week in Greece. There's a new wave of struggle rising, and the government is confronted with a crucial vote in Parliament. There will be a general strike in Greece on Tuesday. It will be the 27th general strike since the austerity attack started in Greece 3 years ago. But this is a general strike with a difference, because at the same time as everybody in every workplace will be striking on Tuesday, the workers in the Greek equivalent of the BBC completing a month of occupation under workers' control, broadcasting. So this is the first general strike that will be televised. And there are also occupations in town halls across Greece, because the Union of Municipal Workers is fighting back against sackings. The thing that is at stake in this stage of the struggle is the demand by the Troika, the IMF, the European Union and the European Central Bank that the government should go ahead and start sacking people that had permanent jobs in the public sector. Now, this has not happened in Greece, despite all the attacks over the past 3 years. They have not been successful in sacking people in the public sector. And this is partly an answer to the people who ask, well, you've had 20-odd general strikes, what have you achieved? Well, we've slowed down the attack, is the answer. The Troika has been pressing for mass sackings in the public sector. Effectively, they want to abolish permanent jobs in the public sector. And they've been trying to do this over the past 2 years. They haven't been successful. So now they're drawing a line, the Troika I mean, and they're saying to the Greek government, you have to push through the sackings, otherwise you're not getting any more money. So the government is attempting to push this through, and it's provoking this new wave of struggle that is generalized, and it's got these new elements. The new element being the occupation of the state broadcaster and the all-out strike by municipal workers. The first question to ask is, why is this happening? If we go back over the past 12 months, the official propaganda of the Greek government, but also the European Union, was saying that at last Greece is conforming with what's happening in other countries. The Greeks are getting reasonable. That was, they will allow the program of structural reforms that the IMF has suggested to go through, and therefore the economy will improve. Things will go for the better. We know that we've had a tough time over the last 3 years, but it's coming to an end. That was the official propaganda. The reality is that this program is failing. Austerity is not working, not even in Greece, where it's taken this huge dimensions. And it's not just us claiming that austerity is not working. Now it's official. There's been a report published by the IMF where they say, when the program started back in 2010, the official prediction was that the Greek economy would shrink by 5.5% between 2009 and 2012. and then from 2012 on, Greece would return to normal. What has happened? The IMF says the Greek economy shrunk between 2009 and 2012 by 17%. They got it 3 times wrong, from 5.5 to 17%. Then on top of that, now we are in 2013. The last year has seen a further shrinking of the economy by 5.5%. So overall, the Greek economy has been shrinking at the rate of 22.5% over this period. The IMF report continues to say that there's been a bank run. The banks have lost 30% of their deposits, and demand in the private sector has fallen by 33% between 2008 and 2013. That's a third. So when we say austerity is not working, these are the dramatic results, and this is not an announcement by the far left. It's the IMF that is saying that austerity has not worked in the case of Greece. They also make another admission that the reason for the failure is that the program in 2010 was designed to protect the European banks rather than the Greek people. Now I don't remember any other case where the IMF had to admit that their structural program was in favor of the banks, not just the Greek banks, the European banks, and not a program designed to improve the Greek economy. So you understand that this is creating a situation where the official government propaganda that we are reaching the end of the story has collapsed. The government is forced into sacking people, and this is creating a new round of fight back that started with the occupation of the Greek BBC. Now, the government parties were seeing that it is coming to this, and the way they tried to prevent this happening was with a two-pronged attack. The first was an escalation of repression. What we have seen in Greece over the past 6 months has been an attempt by the government to ban strikes. So on 3 occasions when important strikes were happening, the government issued orders that the strikers should go back under military orders. If they refused to go back, they would be sacked and face imprisonment. They used this back in January against transport workers in Athens. They fought back. They actually were out on strike for 8 days before the strike was called off. Then they used the same tactic against the seamen who were out on strike in February. And again, the tactic worked. The union leadership, after 6 days of strike, decided that they had to obey the government order. The third time was in May, when the teachers were preparing to go on strike during the exams. And the government issued an order before the strike commenced. So they blackmailed the union leadership into calling off the strike. So there's been a concerted effort by the government to escalate repression and deal with the strike wave in this way. Many people on the left believe that this government campaign is successful, that people are now too tired, too scared to lose their jobs, and therefore the strike wave will be receding. The reality is quite the opposite, and the people who proved that the reality is the opposite are the workers at the Greek Broadcasting Corporation, ERT. The government attempted to start the campaign for sackings in the public sector by shutting down ERT and saying, now your employer doesn't exist. So 2,650 of you are now unemployed. You don't need to be sacked because the corporation for which you were working has been dissolved, has been shut down. They thought that this kind of blackmail would scare people, but it backfired completely. On the same evening, that was the 11th of June, when the government issued that order shutting down ERT, the workers went into occupation and started producing their own program, showing that outside the main building, people were gathering in support of the occupation. Now we are very proud because the first banner to reach the occupation was the banner of comrades that were taking part in a demonstration of solidarity with the Turkish movement in Taksim Square. When the news came out that there is an occupation, the comrades took the banner. The banner read, "The Workers United will never be defeated." So they got the banner, rushed up to the ERT building, and the banner was broadcast. It was the first thing that was broadcast by the workers' occupation of ERT. A very powerful message, obviously, and a message for which we are very proud. Now, the second way that the government tried to avoid what was coming was by pressurizing the left, by attacks on the left, and especially using racism. It was a two-pronged attack. On the one hand, using the racist card, they were trying to disorient people, divide the movement, and so on. And at the same time, they were trying to put pressure on the left. The Prime Minister himself made a statement that what is to blame for the rise of the neo-Nazis in Greece? The left is to blame. Because the left supports the immigrants. And therefore, if you have a left that's so irresponsible that they say, okay, immigrants are welcome here, of course, this produces a backlash, and that's how the neo-Nazi Golden Dawn has been strengthened. This is a terrible attack, and it means that the fight back has to get the support of the left. It's crucial that the left does not concede faced with these attacks. Now, this is a serious problem. This is a serious problem. Although the level of struggle is going up rather than down through the initiative of rank-and-file people, through the initiative of ordinary workers. The reports about the occupation of ERT from our own comrades is that when we first raised the question, what are we going to do when the government attack comes? Our position was we should resist the attack. We don't accept even one person to lose their job. So what do? We hold a General Assembly and we occupy. The comrade who put this proposal received just one vote, their own. That was a few days before the occupation. But when it came to the crunch, the comrade was not alone. The meeting was unanimous in occupying. And that's a very, very powerful indication of what's happening, of the radicalization that is in progress inside the working class. So what we say is that the left needs to respond to the level of radicalization that's happening at rank and file level. The left needs to resist the attack coming from the right. Now, this is easier said than done. The reality is that there are problems on the left in Greece. Most of you are probably familiar with how sectarian the Communist Party is in Greece. They're keeping up this attitude when the question of a teacher's strike during the exams came up, and the whole left was saying, right, let's support the teachers fighting back. The Communist Party said, this is adventurist. A strike during the exam period is adventurist. So they split the left on that one. But they were defeated. Mass meetings of teachers across Greece voted for the strike to take place. Unfortunately, the strike didn't take place. And the blame wasn't just on the CP people, it was also on Syriza people. At the last moment, when it came to the crunch, they called off the strike. So there are problems that the pressures on the left are forcing the left leaderships to backtrack. I just gave the example of the teachers' strike. There are other examples. There was a crisis in Cyprus, a huge crisis. Cyprus became the first country where bailing out the banks was organized at the expense of depositors rather than the bosses and the bankers. This created an uproar in Cyprus and in Greece. Akel is the main party, the party of the left in Greece, and traditionally both the Communist Party and Syriza have been supporting Akel. After the crisis in Cyprus, Akel took a position that we must re-examine the membership of Cyprus in the Eurozone. If we need to break with the euro, well, we must examine this possibility. That was a big step forward for the left. It wasn't followed, it wasn't taken up by the left in Greece. The position of Syriza is still that we must stay within the euro. And this means that there is a continuous drift to the right. And it is creating problems. The main problem on the left is what will happen if the government collapses in the face of the strikes, which is a real possibility. People are fighting back, the struggle is picking up. The government majority has been reduced to 3. A year ago, when they formed the coalition government, there were 3 parties in the government. The Tories, the Labour type PASOK, and the section of the left, the democratic left, as it's called, that decided to join the government and support the austerity program. These are people who broke away from Syriza to the right. They were part of the government until 3 weeks ago, a month ago. When the ERT occupation started, the democratic left decided that they cannot stay with the government, so they withdrew. It means that the government now is reduced to a two-party government, and their majority is just 3 MPs in a House of 300. So they're quite likely to lose the vote next week when the memorandum of agreement with the Troika over the sackings in the public sector comes to Parliament, or the week after when a bill comes to Parliament on the future of ERT, the Broadcasting Corporation. These are crucial votes, and in a situation where the struggle is picking up, the question that the government will collapse is on the cards. Now, a year ago, Syriza was saying, we want a government of the left. Why doesn't the Communist Party join forces with us so we can have a government of the left? Now this position has evolved. Syria is saying we can form a coalition with other forces. Now, it's not a government of the left. It's a government that includes people like the independent Greeks. The independent Greeks are a breakaway from the Tories, and they are a terrible lot. I don't want to make comparisons with this country, but you can imagine what a breakaway from the Tories can be like. So it's a shift to the right on the part of the Syriza leadership to be considering that they may form a government with people like that. It's not an abstract issue either, because the pressure is on the question of immigration, for example. The position of the breakaway from the Tories, the independent Greeks, on immigration is that Greece is getting too many immigrants. We must either repatriate, we must shut down the borders and stop any further immigration and start repatriating. Now, what will the Syriza leadership do to get an agreement? Will they concede on immigration policy? Their position up to now has been to defend the immigrants. Unfortunately, there is a debate going on that they should change their position. And it comes from the strangest quarters that you can imagine. You know, there's a former Maoist group that is part of Syriza. In their paper, there's been an article that says, we have too many illegal immigrants in Greece. We must cut down the numbers. It's an opener for the debate that's coming up. And it's absolutely crucial that the left must not concede on that level, because it will mean a huge problem for this movement that's fighting to overthrow the government if the next lot that comes in are making concessions like that. So we have great tasks in our hands, comrades. We are trying to support the fight back. As you know, SEC in Greece is part of an anti-capitalist coalition called Austerity. Austerity is central to supporting the strikes and the fight back. But apart from playing this role, we need also to politically help the movement. Help it resist the onslaught from the right on the issues of racism. Help it also make the necessary steps in terms of the program, the kind of measures that need to be taken. After Cyprus, after the experience of Cyprus, breaking with the Eurozone is a very central plank of a left program to deal with the crisis. So we are arguing, we are saying that the left needs to move in that direction. There have been steps in changing the positions of the left. For example, on the question of the debt. When the crisis started and we were saying cancel the debt, the broader left was saying this is not an issue. Now this has changed. The Communist Party agrees that we have to cancel the debt. The Syriza leadership says we have to cancel the greatest part of the debt. Well, even a partial cancellation would be a step forward. It is a step forward that this position is changing. What we are saying, what we are arguing is that we need to see more changes like that. We need to see the left reshaping its program so that it's in an anti-capitalist direction. A break with the euro, a cancellation of the debt, and an acceptance that people, when they fight back, they have their own solution, and it's called workers' control. What the public broadcasting corporation workers have done, they have shown not that only that it is people are willing to fight back, they are radicalized enough to organize an occupation, they have gone a step further. They've put workers' control on the agenda. And we are saying the left must debate this agenda. Workers' control is the way forward, is the solution if we throw the troika out and the government collapses. It is a real possibility in the coming months that the government will collapse, and then this debate will take place within a huge movement that will have huge expectations. This is what we are trying to address with the small forces of the revolutionary left. It's a huge task, but we are, as ever, optimistic that we can face it.
Okay, we've got plenty of time for speakers. If you do want to speak, there's members of the team are walking around with speaker slips. So get a speaker slip from them and get it back to them so that we can get you in an order to call. What I'm going to do, I'm going to call the first few speaker slips that we've got here. When you've got 3 minutes to speak, because I want to fit in as many people as possible. When you get to 2 minutes, I'm going to tap on the microphone. If you get to 3 minutes, I'll tap again, and I want you to stop if I tap a second time. If you want to get everybody in. The first speaker I'm going to call is Volkard Mosler, and that is going to be followed by Muro, I've got here.
Yeah, I'm from Marx 21 in Germany, not from West Germany, that used to be a long time ago. Still used to it. Anyway, I'm quite glad to say something principal in the first statement, that there is a revolutionary left in Greek, and not only a left, reformist left. I have a t-shirt here, it says the left party from Germany. This seems to be a contradiction, because Syriza and the left party are sister parties. But Marx 21 is a revolutionary organization within the left party, fighting for a revolutionary party. And this means, in the case of Greece, cancel the debt and nationalization of the banks. I think they go together, actually. If you just cancel the debt and don't nationalize the banks, you might have a situation like in 29, where a crisis of the banks lead to a collapse of the whole economy. So you have to do it together, really. Nationalize banks and cancel the debt. So I think this demand is very important, and the left party in Germany supports this demand. But there was a big debate on the euro just in the last conference in Dresden, where I was a delegate, and there was a motion proposed by the left of the left party, and it asked to support those countries and left parties like Akel, for example, to call for the cancel the debt, and if they are thrown out of the euro, we should still support them and still cancel the debt. Still demand from our government to cancel the debt, not then say, okay, they are out of the euro, we have nothing to do with them anymore. But then real solidarity should step in. This motion was defeated by 2/3 to 1/3 because the leadership would argue this is not the issue of the day. But we argue if there is the situation like in Greece there is, either you have the euro or you have hospitals. You vote for the hospitals. And then you are thrown out of the euro because you want to stick to the hospital. That's the situation we are in. And I think the left has to find that the majority of the left in Europe shows active solidarity with the Greeks to a solution which is not paid by closing hospitals like this. So I think this is an important issue. I think a big part in the German left anyway would be soft on the euro in the sense that they don't see the difference between imperialism and internationalism. Many people think the euro is a progressive step because they all have one currency. Really, if you look at it, what happened in the last 13 years, it has been a magnificent instrument for German imperialism, actually, because German imperialism became much stronger than it used to be in the 90s. And there was so they were able to export the crisis to Southern Europe. One of the most prominent conservative economists, Hans Werner Sinn, he said, we are so good off because they are so bad off. I think that sums it up.
Okay, the next one for you here, the speaker after that, if you want to get yourself ready, is going to be, I think this is Marie Holborough. Next.
Hi. I'm coming from Italy, where I'm a supporter of the International Communist League. I was a country which is whose working class is being immiserated by capitalism and by the EU, not as the Greeks, but quite a lot, and where the trade union bureaucracy and the reformist left has been able to keep down the working class. I feel a lot of sympathy for the firmness and determination of the Greek workers. But it is a fact that 27 general strikes and many struggles have not been able to really fight back the capitalist offensive. And this is related to three main issues. One is that the Greek left does support the European Union, which is a reactionary imperialist conglomerate that must be smashed by the working class in order to advance to a socialist federation of Europe. While the Greek left has strongly supported the EU, especially Syriza, which is born based on their defense of the European Union. And of course you have said that Syriza is drifting to the left, but still your politics is to try and get them back to the correct line that they maybe had 1 year ago. And second point in Greece is the stronger nationalism of the left. We've mentioned the Communist Party, of course, but it's not only limited to the Communist Party of Greece. Syriza is also strongly nationalist when it comes, for instance, to Turkey, and you yourself have written that patriotism is a form of nationalism, but you're not going to fight the fascists with this reactionary line. And what is needed in Greece is a revolutionary party which splits the working class, particularly from the Kukui, which has the historically allegiances of the most advanced workers in that country. And in fact, although the Communist Party has a history of betrayals in Greece, like in any other country, in the last elections they stood clearly against the European Union and against a fake government of the left, which would have been a government of austerity. Our comrades in Greece did support the Communist Party in the elections critically, while you basically gave backhanded support to Syriza. So that's also a choice where you stay between the European Union and a proletarian revolution in Greece.
The next speaker after me is going to be Anna, I think, Anna Livingston.
Yeah, viewing what's going on in Greece is very, very important for us in Ireland because it gives a perspective, gives us a possibility of seeing both the potential and the difficulties that are confronted. And the first thing that strikes me from what Panos and the Greek comrades have explained to us is the absolute centrality of the public sector workers. You know, the idea that the national radio station, TV station is occupied shows you the strength that they can potentially have. And also the fact that municipal workers are in occupation. You know, people somehow believe that somehow, particularly in Ireland, this is hugely important because the public sector workers are not just numerically strong, but are politically being the most unionised, the most combative, and which is why precisely our ruling class in Ireland attacks the public sector. It will attack it in any possible way. And just recently, for example, they have tried to reintroduce, not yet the sackings that Panos was talking about, but huge attack on the public service and public sector workers, where people's wages have been reduced since 2008 by 30%, where people's working week now goes definitely to 39, and if you include lunch hours and so on, it can rise to 44. They said that they're not going to sack people, but that, you know, it is a minor thing, because at the moment the real problem is huge levels of overwork, stress, and so on. And as part of that, and again, the public sector workers in Ireland resisted the first programme that was brought to them, Part 2 it was called, and they rejected it. And for temporarily, that changed the climate a bit. People began talking about what is the alternative to austerity. But like what Panos says, the ruling class goes into overdrive. And it goes into overdrive in a particular political way. Not only has it divided the public sector from the private sector, under this New Deal, they're trying to divide public sector workers among themselves. One thing for the nurses, one thing for the teachers, one thing for the manual workers, one thing for the white-collar workers. And, you know, they got away with it. They got the second one through. But like what Panos says, once they've got over one problem, another one rises. Like in Greece, you know, it's a mirror image. The ruling class says all the time, we're just turning the corner, we've been turning the corner, we must be dizzy. Because in fact, just recently, we're back in recession again in Ireland. Massive emigration, massive hardship, 20,000 people in debt of mortgages and so on. All that is not going away, and austerity will bring the fight again. But the left is really important what we do here. Somebody was making mention before of supporting sectarianism has to be out. There's no room for any sectarianism. I don't know whether the Communist Party in Greece is a bit less sectarian now with its involvement in the ERT. But on the other hand, we have a similar problem in Ireland where some of the left is so sectarian that actually it's only concentrating on elections and not building the fight back. And also, what we have to do is to resist in concrete. So how are we doing this? First of all, through people before profit, we have scored small victories of making sure that the forestry was not privatised. That was important, that was through people power. But secondly, on the day after the general strike in Greece, we're calling a jail the bankers thing, because every opportunity, you may have heard there were tapes out on the banks that disgusted people with these wally people talking, you know, saying, would the state give some more money? Horrible, you know, people were really shocked by those tapes. In response to that, we've called as broad as we can a protest outside the door on Wednesday to do that. So we have to take every opportunity, even if it seems difficult, every opportunity to generalise the fight against austerity. And secondly, in order to do that, we need clear revolutionary politics at the centre.
Okay, after Anna, I'm going to public comment. I'm trying to get as many people in as possible. So if people can stick to time and sum up, and I ask you to sum up, please.
I'm Anna Livingston, I'm a health worker, I'm a GP doctor in Tower Hamlets, and I've just come from the conference of Keep Our NHS Public. And the first thing I wanted to say is that in our annual general meeting today, solidarity with Greek health workers and the Greek people was raised and supported by everyone, so solidarity. The second thing I wanted to say was that we need very much to learn from one another in this struggle, so it's great to hear from you today. In the National Health Service, where we are ostensibly not having cuts, but actually that's a lie because massive cuts are taking place, we need to show the vision of what's happening in Greece in the health service, and we need solidarity for that. We can learn from each end, and we need to share the lessons of fight back. It is no mean achievement that people have not had public service redundancies from permanent jobs in Greece. In the UK, we've had that in the health service and public services for several years now, despite not being at the very sharp end of the recession and the cutbacks in Europe. We need workers and communities in Europe and across the world to be sticking together to support our public services through unions, through communities, and even through campaigns about the competition legislation. Final sentence: privatisation, austerity and xenophobia are no answer to our society. We need a revolutionary approach, a workers' approach, to stick together, unity and solidarity.
My name's Nick. I'm also a speaker for the International Communist League. A comrade from Italy spoke earlier and mentioned Syriza. And I wanted to say also about Syriza, it was in the election a question of principle to oppose it, because the European Union, as a capitalist imperialist trade bloc for Marxists, is a question of principle. We oppose it on principle. There's no way that Marxists can support a capitalist trade bloc which must necessarily be directed against the working class. And that's why it was necessary to oppose Syriza in the election. Now, Austerity, which is the coalition that SEC is involved in, did not openly campaign for Syriza, but Kalinikos actually expressed it when he said that the stronger its voice is, the greater the pressure will be on Syriza to stand firm in the face of forces trying to impose austerity as Greece's permanent condition. In other words, it's a pressure group on Syriza. And, you know, we're not in favour of a left government in Greece. A left government, left, you see, doesn't have any class content to it. I think what is necessary at the present time in Greece, you know, it's true that the Greek working class has demonstrated immense combativity and heroism, in fact. But as Marxists, we have to look at what are the obstacles. Why are we not going forward? Why is there no forward momentum? And part of the reason for that, the reason for that is to do with dealing with what the obstacles are. As the comrade mentioned, one of those obstacles is nationalism. Cyprus just gave a speech at the Syriza conference that was, kind of a deranged nationalist diatribe. There had been the burning of German flags, so on and so forth. So in that respect, you know, when you publish an article in Ergatiki Alliligi, Workers' Solidarity, this was 9th of January, which says that nationalism and internationalism are synonymous and independent, and that the national identity connects the worker with all his fellow countrymen with whom he fights to resolve the different national issues. That's not opposing nationalism or fighting nationalism, that's pandering to it. The Trotsky's transitional program is actually designed for a situation like Greece, which is calling out for revolution, but in which the consciousness of the working class has not reached the level where it can actually fight for power.
Okay, after Tim, have I got Tim Knight-Hughes? After Tim, I've got Annie, and I'm afraid I can't read your surname. If you put a slip in, you're called Annie. I've got you here.
Hi, I'm Tim from Norwich SWP. I've really got a few questions, but first just wanted to say, with Greek workers, the television workers, I think that was amazing. It was really inspirational, where it gave everyone from my branch, workers, retired workers, I'm unemployed at the moment, unemployed worker, a massive boost, because it was a victory. And it forced the Greek government to back down, and it was amazing, and it shows the kind of power that we want, workers' power, where we take control over our lives. And I think everyone around the world must have been probably, kind of going crazy at that, because I certainly was when I heard the news of that, and I told my friends, etc. But my questions are more about how big are the Greek revolutionary socialists in Greece? Have you grown? That's a question. And where do you feel that you can grow out of the current situation? My second question is, if we're having a serious discussion about if workers could take power, if they bring down the government through strikes, are there forms of workers' power, and then even in a proto form, starting to emerge? I know the ERT is a form of workers' power if they're running the television station. Are there prototype forms of workers' councils and community councils and action groups? Are they emerging in Greece? And lastly, so I think when I joined the party, a lot of people on the left in Norwich, a lot of young people, think that Syriza is this really brilliant thing and they're doing a great job. The comrades in my branch kept me in a good political position by saying that this is about politics, and that they read a quote by Trotsky, which is that in revolutions and major upsurges, when workers take onto the political stage and they don't see politics as for someone else, they are making the history. They test out ideas by approximations, and so my question was, are workers in Greece testing out political ideas by approximations, or is it a bit more complicated than that? So, and also lastly, I think Lenin's Left-Wing Communism is quite an important book about how you pull workers from reformism and from those trade union bureaucracy, and maybe even from Syriza to a more revolutionary position. And I just wanted to hear from Panos and others who knew more than me about how we go about doing that. So anyway, but solidarity from Norwich. Hopefully we'll have a Norwich Revolutionary Council in good time, so thanks.
Okay, my apologies, the slip I just had, I've got down there, it's actually a question read out by the chair. So the next speaker is actually going to be Nikos Laudon, so you can make your way forward to speak. But the question on the slip is, how united or divided are anti-Seers and their politics and policies? Okay, after Nikos, I'm going to call Andy Durgan.
Okay, first for the comment from ICL, who spoke on the internationalism in this article from the Workers' Solidarity, I'd like to tell him to check his Google Translate again, because it didn't work well. It's okay. The Workers' Solidarity has been sued for articles supporting the Macedonian minority. Our comments have been beaten up by thugs and fascists because they support the Turkish minority. Recently, a lawyer connected with the Golden Dawn has again sued our newspaper because we are exposing them as fascists. So, okay, it's clear what's happening. I'd like to bring some issues around the workers' occupation of the national television and the radio in Greece, because on its own, it's one of the biggest lessons we have had from the struggles in the recent years. First of all, in the power of workers' control. It's the most impressive lesson. The public broadcaster is under workers' control, and that means that the same journalists that have been selling lies and telling lies through their shows in the television are the same journalists that are now presenting programs talking against the government, supporting the occupation, because the workers they are organized and have imposed their will on them. I remember a specific journalist that had the pre-electoral show before the national elections, and he had invited comrades from Antarsia there, and he was trying to push them and humiliate them in some way. And now he's one of them that he announces that Antarsia banners are in the courtyard of the broadcaster supporting us, etc., etc. So it's the power of workers' control in its most impressive way. Second thing is that ERT, public broadcaster, reminds us that workers' control is not something coming from the very far away future. It's not something. The workers in ERT are not some especially radicalized workers. The union was controlled by PASOK, and actually it was one of the strongholds of trade unions supporting PASOK. And these are the workers that now have organized this big example, and it's an example. That's the last thing I want to say. In one of the first broadcast programs, the journalist stopped the program, connected with the courtyard, and say, 500 workers from the cement factory have arrived here to show their solidarity. They connect with the courtyard, and the journalist, the reporter outside, said, "I have to announce that the heart of the working class is beating here, outside the courtyard." bread factory. If you look, a cement factory and a bread factory have connected with the occupied television, and if you look even at their Facebook pages of the unions, people say their opinions. You know what's the main motive is that they're saying, we have to follow the example. We produce bread, we produce cement. We can take these things under our control. The journalists in there show the example. That's the way against the bosses that are trying to shut us down. It's not a slogan of the far left now. It's a slogan coming out of the struggle and it's generalized.
After Andy, I've got Jonathan Neal.
Andy Durgan from Lucha in the Spanish State. Yeah, I wanted to make a more general comment about how you've got a parallel situation developing elsewhere in Southern Europe. We also heard about Ireland, what it's called, of course we're all referred together as pigs, so I quite enjoy being pigs together. That's Portugal, Italy, Greece and Spain. Portugal, Ireland, sorry, Greece and Spain. There are quite a few similarities now what's happening in Spanish state in Greece, although Greece undoubtedly is in the vanguard, it's the most advanced in terms of the class struggle, obviously for lots of reasons which Panos has outlined, but you can see certain similarities. For example, the collapse of bipartidism in Spain. In Spain, since the transition, the Socialist Party and the PP, the Spanish Conservative Party, have got between 70 and 80% of the vote. Up until the last elections, when they got 69, 72% of the vote, but they've maintained that until very recent. That has completely collapsed. That's the first thing that's similar. And now in the polls, they're not getting more than 45%. Not only has the PP support totally collapsed, very similar parallel there, the collapse in the support for New Democracy, but in particular, you've got the parallel with the collapse of social democracy. First time ever, with the Social Democrats in opposition, they've been unable to take advantage of the complete collapse and the lack of credibility that the PP has, and their vote is actually going down, although they're in opposition. So you've got that. You've also, of course, got different forms of class struggle that in Greece. We don't have as many general strikes. We've only had 3 in the last 2 years, not 29 or whatever the figure is in Greece. But even so, what there is a continual, ongoing fragmentation and rumbling on of disputes and strikes and protests, now heavily influenced, as was pointed out in the meeting yesterday about the Spanish state, by the Indignados movement, which has sort of spread out into the rank and file of the trade unions and introduced new forms of struggle, particularly the rank and file groups amongst the public sector workers. And you have, of course, the example of the movement against evictions, which has been very effective in stopping evictions in Spain. We also have the political side to this, and the question of Syriza is extremely important in this sense, to understand how it's actually radicalising at one level the left, the reformist left. Of course, obviously, what we have to do is be very clear, independent about our politics and explain the weaknesses of that. But also we have to understand this is a move to the left. It's an important move to the left, where the left reformists talk about Syriza. What does this mean? It means breaking with social democracy or the Social Democratic Party. This is something which we have to welcome, at the same time maintaining our independence. So you have this impact on the reformist left, an impact on all the different sections coming out of the movements in the Spanish state, and this idea that you can somehow have this radical reformist party, which of course obviously has a whole series of problems. But the point is, this shifts the debate dramatically to the left, and that is how we understand the importance of Syriza. Not that we think it is the model, not that we think we should do exactly the same, nor that we think it's going to bring about socialism through parliament or even anything like that, but it actually does reflect a more general politicalisation and the possibility of opening up in new forms of political activity.
Okay, after Jonathan, I've got Sean Wallace.
I listened to Panos say that he's worried because he has a really big problem, because what on earth will we do if the enormous strike wave brings down the government next week? And my first thought, like everybody else in the room, is I'll take your problem, Panos. But my second thought is Panos is speaking in that way because in his head he's not really speaking for a party, he's really speaking for a class. And this is how a leader of the working class speaks in moments of crisis. speaks in terms of the interests and the fears of the whole class. But to do that, you have to have a party. I think that many of us were confused at the time of the last Greek election about should the comrades in Greece be going in with Syriza and voting for Syriza, and many of us thought, well, are they just standing out because they're being too sectarian and so on? And people all around us in the British movement who kept up with such things were saying such things to us. I think we have to understand the absolute importance of the fact that the comrades in SEC didn't do that. Even though they got a very small vote in that moment, what they did was to hold on to an independent voice that would be there at the moment of the crisis. Because when the crisis gets big enough, the left and the working class always faces the question, do we go into the government and administer the system, and in doing so, destroy any hope of a left or an alternative for a generation? And there needs to be a voice saying, no, we don't. We fight on. We don't take on the government. We continue to fight the system. And to have that voice big enough to be heard, and SEC is not big, but that voice is big enough to be heard in Greece. Everyone knows that voice is there. To have that, you have to build a revolutionary party in the long years before you ever think you'll get that opportunity. Please join the SWP. Thank you.
I think the revolutionary process in Greece, the class struggle in Greece, at this point in time, is an accelerated process where decisions have to be made, which will on which there'll be turning points. There'll be opportunities, but those opportunities are coming in very, very fast and very close together. But that actually places a huge responsibility on the comrades in Greece. What I wanted to talk about was, what do we do if we're not in Greece? What do we do if we're not in a country where the rate of change and the sort of struggle is as intense, and the crisis is much more protracted? I'm talking about this country, and I'm talking about other countries in Europe who are entering recession or entering crisis, or have been in a crisis for a much longer period of time, where in effect there's been an accommodation, I would argue, to the level of crisis. You know, I mean, I've just come back from Greece, and one of the arguments that I've been having with just ordinary workers is what they need to understand is that whereas their crisis hit them from a situation only in 2008, where the generation had grown up with expectations of improving living standards. You know, you only have to go back to the 1980s to see the kind of living standards that people had got by the 2000s. And that had been ripped apart from 2005, 2008 onwards. And what I think we can say about that is that compared to Britain, where we've had a crisis from the 1970s onwards, we've had a long decline. And that changes the nature of the pace of the political struggle. And I think what we have to do in Britain is we have to connect the arguments. And last year at the National Union that I belong to, it's the UCU, I put a motion for dropping the debt, the Greek debt. And I think that every comrade who is in a trade union can raise that motion in their workplace. We shouldn't be raising I don't agree that we should be raising a slogan which just says, get some Greeks into your workplace. Frankly, there may be Greeks in your neighbourhood because they've been thrown out, they've left Greece because of the crisis. But actually the argument is about what happens in Britain, because the argument that says drop the debt in Greece is an argument that says drop the debt in Britain. It says, actually, what we have to do is attack the whole question of austerity and start challenging in our unions. And I don't think we're doing that sufficiently, because really that should be common sense for most comrades. But we need to find ways in which we're articulating that.
That's right. The last speaker I'm afraid we're able to fit into this session as today is Mark Thomas. We've had a lot of slips in, so I'm really sorry. I've been trying to get in as many people as I can.
I had the great opportunity of going to Greece this year to report on the demonstration in Manolada, which is a farm area where migrant workers had gone 6 months without being paid. When they demanded their pay, they got shot at by the bosses. And in the context of all the police attacks against immigrants in Greece we've heard about in the last session. And it was incredibly inspiring to see several thousand workers who were in that really oppressed situation, marching in this really defiant, really vibrant march. And that is a march that happened in large part because of the role that revolutionaries and people in the SEC party played in going down there and talking to those migrants. And that's an important part of what revolutionaries do, organising the struggle. But it was also raising a really bold slogan in the context of the way politics is going in Greece, of demanding the legalisation of all migrants as a demand. And I think, just to sort of briefly answer the questions people have asked, where some people have said, is it better to be in bigger mass parties like large reformist parties like Syriza, and others saying it's wrong to try and be a pressure group on those parties. I think actually both those positions sort of miss the point of what we try to do as revolutionaries, because in Britain, when Labour echoes the Tories in attacking migrants, that's dreadful, and we do want to pull Labour to having to stand in with migrants. When a Labour MP speaks out against racism, of course that helps us all, but we don't do that by climbing inside the Labour Party. You don't push a wheelbarrow by climbing into it. Actually, it's by raising these demands and by fighting for politics as well as action inside the working class movement that revolutionaries can have a real impact. So to echo what Jonathan said, that's what we try to do in the SWP as well, and I think the Greek comrades illustrate incredibly well what an important role that can play.
Yes, following on from what Dave said, I mean, the real argument on the left here and internationally, of course, is not whether Antalya is a ginger group on Syriza. The real argument is whether Antalya was and is right to stand outside Syriza, despite the fact that it's clearly become a huge focus for all those many people who want to end austerity, for its rise in the polls, etc., etc. Now, there are many aspects to this question, but crucially, it's a concrete question. It has to be tested in practice. You see, one of the other tasks that became urgent for the left in Greece after the May and June elections was the question of fascism, the shocking rise of Golden Dawn, and the need to create a new anti-fascist movement. Now, it's clear to me from afar that there's been considerable progress here. Right? There is an anti-fascist movement that's attempting to close down the ability of Golden Dawn to organise on the streets. This is a fantastically urgent and significant development, but it seems to me that at the centre of it has been Antalya and our comrades in SEC. It's not an initiative that's come from the Cyprus leadership of Syriza, despite its much bigger forces and so on and so forth. And why is this the case? It's because Syriza's eyes are on government. And I suspect that they fear clashes in the streets and so on, the media whip up and attacks on them. In other words, it's sometimes the fact that a smaller, sharper axe that's clear in its tasks, that's orientated on struggle, not government, first of all, and is not sectarian, tries to constantly draw in Syriza or sections of Syriza, even try and bring in the KKE and so on, to try and build a movement against the fascists, has an ability to shape and reshape the struggle in a way that takes it forward. And therefore, it's not just a question of looking at the size of Syriza and so on, it's saying, can we build a network of militants who are clear that can actually make a concrete difference in the struggle in the here and now?
One of the things that fighting back against austerity has achieved is to make Ireland a Mediterranean country. It's now counted among the pigs, and as you know, the other pigs are all in the Mediterranean. So we are in it together with the Irish, the Portuguese, well, I don't know if I should say the Spanish. This is important. I was saying before that the Greek government was trying to present a success story. Now, this line was borrowed from Ireland. It was the Irish government that was the success story of applying austerity to cure the debt crisis. So, the scandal that's breaking out in Dublin about the banker who said, how much do we need to save the banks? 7 billion. In reality, it was 37 billion, a difference of a mere 30 billion euros. And he was asked by one of his friends, how did you come up with this figure of only 7 billion? And he replied, off my ass. Now, it's this kind of, I can't find the right word. The ruling class are in such a situation where the kind of lies, the kind of tricks, the kind of things that they use are discrediting the politicians that they have in their pay. This is happening across Europe. It's very severe in Greece. There's, outside of the left, there is no politician that has the credibility to stand up and say, okay, you have to make sacrifices for me, for my government, for the country. This is a process that is producing the political crisis. And it is happening across Europe. It's the leader of the European Central Bank, Mario Draghi, is involved in a scandal in Italy that Italy was cooking the books, the accounts, to present its debt was lower than it was in reality. This sort of thing happened in Greece in the 90s, on the way to enter the euro. And the politicians who did this are completely discredited. Now the same thing is happening in Italy. So it's, when we say that people are getting radicalized, they're getting radicalized through the experience of struggle. There's been so much struggle in Greece, but they're getting radicalized through all these pictures coming from the other countries. People realize that the bankers and the politicians are doing the same thing across Europe. And this is an important part of the consciousness in fighting back. Because it is like that, it's very important to relate to people who are developing this kind of consciousness. So to say that it is a question of principle to oppose Syriza, no, it's not a question of principle. It is not. It's a question of using the right tactic. We have to be together with Syriza on many occasions. When we fight the fascists, when we support the occupation of ERT, when we argue for a strike in the teachers' union, while the Communist Party was saying this is adventurist. We were together with Syriza members in saying the strike must go ahead. It was the leadership that saw that. The rank and file members of Syriza were with Andalusia in supporting the strike. Nobody should think that we control 20,000 teachers, right? We are revolutionaries, we are growing. Andalusia is bigger this year than it was last year. Many people thought that because of the election result that the Andalusia vote went down, that would be the end of Andalusia. It was not. It was not. We had a national conference of Andalusia at the beginning of June. It was bigger than the conference we had last year. So the revolutionaries are growing, but not to the extent of having the support of 20,000 teachers. 20,000 teachers voting for the strike. That was teachers influenced by Andalusia, influenced by Syriza, and many also influenced by the Communist Party and defying the sectarian line of their leadership. That's how we have to operate. And I think this is something that we are learning. It's not easy, comrades. Of course, it is in our tradition to speak of the United Front. We always refer to the Third International, to Trotsky, and so on. This is very important. But apart from having this as a reference point, you need also the experience of applying the tactic in reality. And it's not always easy. I think we are getting it right. The way things are developing, the way that the radicalization is finding expression, the fact that when the ERT workers occupied and we rushed in solidarity, that evening after I was describing how our banner reached there first, well, the next few hours and the next few days were banners of Andalusia, of SEC, of Syriza and the Communist Party flying alongside each other in support of the occupation. That was magnificent. Of course, the problems are there. The leaderships are backtracking. The CP is not to be seen in the occupation now. And Syriza is thinking, well, if we have an election campaign, will it be winning votes if we support the earth workers, or will it be losing votes? They count things in that way. They are parliamentary reformists, and that's why we oppose and criticize them. We say this is no way forward. We have to use the strength of the organized working class to fight back. And this is the main dividing line. So we are, at the same time, we fight alongside, and at the same time we criticize. This is the way to go forward, and to say that this is a ginger group on Andalusia. Well, the Communist Party says Syriza is composed of 12 different groups, and Andalusia is the 13th group. It is outside. They taunt us in that way. I think this is a ridiculous sectarian way of taunting revolutionaries, and I think it shouldn't be repeated by other revolutionaries. So on the question of what's coming up, the questions of cancelling the debt, nationalizing the banks, encouraging workers to go ahead with workers' control will be central in the coming period in the Greek context, and not only in the Greek context. This is the sort of issues that we'll have to face, and we need international solidarity in that. It will not be easy. Okay, workers in Greece have proved that they can organize, they fight back, they're radicalizing, but they must not be alone. And this is an argument that we are having inside the Greek movement. Because the question of will we be alone if we break with the euro is scaring people. And it is used as a scare tactic, both by the right and by the compromising left. They say, why the hell are you leading people? It will be a tragedy. We will be on our own. And we are trying to say, no, we are not going to be on our own. There will be workers in Ireland, in Italy, in Germany fighting with us. And I'm very glad the first speaker was Volkert from Germany. When Volkert says the euro is an instrument of German imperialism, well, if we say that in Greece, it doesn't count much. If it comes from a German revolutionary, it counts very, very much.